The public is being conditioned to look at the sky. They are shown new missile defense tests, a familiar spectacle of kinetic power. This is a deliberate misdirection. The prohibitive cost and predictable trajectory of kinetic warfare make it a tertiary threat. The mathematical incentive for any adversary is not to outspend you, but to bankrupt you. The primary vector of 21st century conflict is not explosive. It is silent. RUSI and CSIS briefs model a non-kinetic decapitation strike targeting the foundational architecture of the global economy. The 1.3 million kilometers of undersea fiber optic cables that carry 99% of all data traffic. This physical vector is paired with a digital accelerant. Software supply chain vulnerabilities, now officially designated a top-tier systemic risk by OWASP, are the entry point. It is not a hypothetical. State actors have already demonstrated the protocol of severing digital lifelines, as seen when Iran cut internet access during protests. The objective is not to destroy military assets, but to induce a simultaneous data and liquidity blackout. By severing subsea cables and blinding satellite networks, an adversary creates a strategic condition known as the blind Leviathan. A superpower with unmatched kinetic force, but zero financial visibility and no command and control. Its naval fleets are operational, but its treasury is offline. This is the impossible choice: absorb a terminal solvency crisis or initiate a launch-on-warning protocol against an enemy it cannot see. This is how you force an escalation from a digital event to a nuclear exchange. Adversary action is not driven by ideology. It is a function of economic calculus. The foundational motive for asymmetric attack is a domestic solvency crisis. A state facing systemic failure at home does not have the luxury of engaging in expensive, symmetrical kinetic conflict. The balance sheet forbids it. According to analysis from strategic bodies like RUSI and CSIS, a large-scale kinetic campaign is often a state's last-ditch effort to manage profound internal liabilities. It is an attempt to externalize a domestic solvency crisis. When the cost of pacifying an unsettled populace and servicing a failing economy exceeds the projected cost of war, the war becomes a mathematical imperative. However, conventional warfare is a high-cost, low-certainty venture. A single missile defense test requires assets like a new target vehicle, representing millions in sunk cost for a single data point. When this model proves unsustainable, the pivot is not a choice. It is a necessity. Weakness forces a strategic rotation away from high-cost kinetic assets and toward low-cost, high-leverage asymmetric vectors. The objective shifts from destroying materiel to inducing systemic paralysis in the adversary. The software supply chain is the prime vector. Its inclusion in the OWASP Top 10 codifies this reality. It is no longer a fringe threat, but a doctrinal attack surface. The motive is to exploit the target's pre-existing economic fragility, like a domestic affordability crisis, and use a digital accelerant to push it toward a systemic solvency event. The ultimate motive is to engineer a strategic trap. By triggering a non-kinetic economic crisis, the adversary forces the superpower into an impossible position. It must either absorb a fatal economic shock, leading to its own domestic solvency crisis, or initiate a disproportionate kinetic response. This retaliation, against a plausibly deniable digital attack, isolates the superpower and accelerates the global power transition. It is checkmate, executed on an economic ledger. The entire kinetic cost model has been inverted. Data from the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, frames the new mathematical reality. A $5 million main battle tank, the symbol of conventional dominance, can now be operationally neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a 10-to-1 or 100-to-1 cost disparity. It is a 10,000-to-1 asymmetric leverage. This is the democratization of violence. The capability to project lethal standoff force is no longer the exclusive domain of nation-states with trillion-dollar defense budgets. The barrier to entry for inflicting strategic damage has collapsed. An adversary no longer needs a shipyard to threaten a navy. They need a workshop. They don't need a stealth bomber program to threaten critical infrastructure. They need a software repository. The adversary's objective is not battlefield victory. It is to induce a national solvency crisis. They can launch these low-cost kinetic and non-kinetic attacks at a rate that makes defense fiscally impossible. For every $1 million the superpower spends on an interceptor missile, the adversary has already launched 2,000 more drone equivalents. The strategy is to force the target's defense spending into an exponential curve, creating a fatal economic hemorrhage that accomplishes what a conventional army never could. The primary battlefield is not a physical territory. It is a jurisdictionally ambiguous gray zone. CSIS reports on emergent instability, from Canadian infrastructure warnings to unrest in South Africa, are not the cause of the threat, but symptoms of its staging. These regions function as proxy laboratories. The core liability of a superpower is not its military, but its systemic economic fragility, evidenced by the ongoing affordability crisis. Adversaries understand this. The high kinetic cost, underscored by the development of new missile defense target vehicles, makes direct warfare mathematically inefficient. The logical alternative is asymmetric. With software supply chain threats now officially on the OWASP Top 10, the attack vector is documented and standardized. These gray zones provide the perfect environment to test and launch these low-cost, high-impact digital weapons. State actors have already demonstrated the blueprint, as seen when Iran cut internet access during domestic protests, proving total control over the digital terrain required for such operations. This is where the launch sequence for an economic solvency crisis begins, in the digital shadows of unstable states. The doctrine is designated launch on warning. It is not a strategy of aggression, but a mathematical protocol designed to guarantee retaliatory solvency. The logic is zero-sum. If an adversary launches a first strike, waiting for physical confirmation of impact, the flash on the horizon, means your own kinetic assets are liquidated in their silos. You lose the ability to retaliate. Therefore, the protocol dictates an immediate, full-scale launch the instant early warning systems detect a credible inbound kinetic threat. This protocol, however, contains a systemic liability. It presumes the integrity of the data. An adversary does not need to build 1,000 missiles. They only need to compromise a single software update. CSS analysis confirms that software supply chain vulnerabilities are a primary vector for state-level attacks. The objective is not to fire a missile, but to inject false data, ghosts, into the early warning network. This creates the fog of digital war. The commander is operationally blind. The incoming signals could be a spoof, a cheap asymmetric probe, or the signals could be real, and the simultaneous digital interference is a calculated accelerant designed to sow confusion and delay response. The launch protocol does not account for this ambiguity. It presents a binary choice based on data that is no longer trustworthy. The adversary has now forced the impossible choice. Do you adhere to the launch protocol, trusting compromised data and initiating a civilization-level kinetic exchange? Or do you break protocol, betting the existence of the nation that the attack is a bluff, risking total annihilation if you are wrong? The kinetic cost is infinite. The digital entry point was a single, insecure software package. This is the mathematical leverage of asymmetric warfare. The affordability crisis is the foundational liability. The software supply chain is the asymmetric vector, now standardized as an OWASP Top 10 threat. RUSI analysts do not model if, they model when. The calibration shot is next. Within 12 months, expect a full-spectrum operational halt at a primary U.S. maritime logistics hub. This will not be a simple data breach. It will be a systemic paralysis triggered by a dormant vulnerability in port automation software. Attribution will be deliberately impossible, officially assigned to a non-state actor. The true purpose is to measure the adversary's cost per effect and, more critically, to test the American launch-on-warning protocol for a non-kinetic economic first strike. This is not a cyber attack. It is a targeting solution designed to trigger a solvency crisis.